Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the discussion webcast of the 2017 Accenture Health Technology Trend Forecast for 2017. It's my pleasure to midwife this session with three of my great friends, big thinkers in healthcare technology. First, I'm Jane Sarason-Kahn, health economist, advisor to the industry. I blog at Health Populi, and I tweet at Healthy Thinker. Let me introduce now Mike Redding from Accenture. He's managing director for Accenture Ventures. I love that little rhyme. Accenture Ventures is the company's portfolio where Mike looks hither, thither, and yon for great investments for the company across all industries. And he's been in this business for over 2 decades, so he's got great perspectives to share. Next in line, and he tweets at Michael J. Redding, R-E-D-D-I-N-G. Next in line for the webcast is Lisa Suennen, Senior Managing Director at GE Ventures, where she oversees GE's portfolio in all things healthcare, medical device, life sciences, health services, and health IT. Lisa also is a great blogger, must-read blog at Venture Valkyrie, and she also co-hosts the podcast Tectonics with David Shaywitz, available on iTunes. And in full disclosure, Lisa Suennen is a great friend of mine. Finally, another great friend from Accenture is Dr. Kaveh Safavi, who is Senior Managing Director for Accenture's healthcare practice, where Kaveh serves globally Accenture's clients across the whole healthcare sector, health services, health plans, and governments all over the world, from Finland to Singapore. We never know. It's like, where's Waldo? Where's Kaveh at any point in time? So getting these three here together live in Chicago right now with me was a tough thing to plan, and we're delighted you're all here to talk about technology, the 5 great trends. As we launch into this discussion, let me remind everybody what those 5 trends are, and then we're going to start weaving them. The first is AI is the new UI, and we'll explain all these throughout the webcast. The second is ecosystem power plays, going beyond platforms. The third is the workforce marketplace. The fourth, design for humans. And finally, uncharted, looking for new business models, new standards. So let's start with our big hats on, my friends, thinking about technology in healthcare. Healthcare, the sector, has often been called a laggard in technology. But I'd like to ask Kaveh, who takes a broad view on these things, is the healthcare industry a laggard when we look at technology?
When you think about technology for things like productivity and personalization, probably more like an adolescent. When it comes to medical technology, diagnosis and treatment, healthcare has been a voracious consumer of technology, and even doctors themselves are early adopters of personal technology. We've tended to think mostly about technology to make care safer, not so much to make it more productive or economically efficient, unlike some of the other industries. So from that perspective, people would say we're lagging, but I think the priorities will catch us up.
Mm-hmm. Lisa, what do you think?
Well, I think it's, to what Kaveh said, it's quite interesting. Clearly, the primary motivator in healthcare has not been efficiency, it's been volume creation. And as such, a lot of the technologies that improve and optimize efficiency and productivity have not been well adopted, and I think they won't be until there's a significant alignment of financial incentives between the patient and the payer and the provider, which is just beginning, really, and we've barely, scratched the surface on that whole concept of value-based care. I do think also the technology adoption in healthcare has been limited by the fact that there's not really a concept of a consumer in the traditional sense of the word. And so you don't have that pull either, really, except in very limited circumstances.
That's great. So Mike, when you look at other industries in technology adoption, what are their approaches to adopting, especially these new things?
Well, and I think there are some very analogous examples where other industries that are maybe as traditional as healthcare, where, like healthcare, the easy problems have been solved, and so now you're getting into the tough stuff. Mm-hmm. And so one of the sectors I look at as an example is in natural resources, especially in oil and gas exploration, because the easy stuff's been dug up already. And so now when you go to find a new oil or gas, you've got to go around stuff, through stuff, sideways, left, right. And it's something where, a normal human operator can't make those split-second precision decisions So they've started to incorporate in the concept of precision drilling the idea of artificial intelligence to augment the operator and to help really unlock the potential that's deep there and waiting for us, but we just haven't gotten there through historic means. Or another example, same industry sector, is augmented reality, right? Things like Microsoft HoloLens or Meta, where you still see the real world, but you now can enhance it digitally. And we've seen some early examples in healthcare, like with Google Glass, where doctors have used it in the operating theaters or on rounds. And I really think that because there's these early adopters in industry, they'll actually be what drives the overall marketplace for augmented reality forward, because they can really show how this technology helps them do their job, do it better, go to that efficiency, and as a result, that will drive the scale, which will then find its way home to healthcare.
It's interesting. I think about Google Glass has announced a new generation
Right.
for healthcare just in the last week or two, something to keep in mind. But always, to Lisa's point, the tyranny of the business model in healthcare, which has been volume versus value, and your health economics lesson to remember throughout this discussion, because business models count in healthcare and how we get paid in healthcare. Romer's Law from Economics 101 in healthcare: a built bed is a filled bed is a billed bed, B-I-L-L-E-D. And until we move from volume to value, that bed is going to get filled, the MRI will get used. This is called supply-induced demand. We still have that problem in healthcare. So we can talk about technology all we want, but the business model, still the business model. So let's dig into our AI is the new UI trend. Artificial intelligence, a lot of hype, a lot of holy grail promise about it. So I'll start again with Kaveh for this question. AI, is there any low-hanging fruit, or is this really a tough nut?
Well, the reason that we picked this category, which is that artificial intelligence is the new user interface, is a recognition that even though artificial intelligence itself is a new category, largely we thought about it as replacing the work, sort of think of it the back end of the work that was being done. And the recognition is that that intelligence itself is going to move into the way people interact with the technology to make it smarter and more adaptive. And so from a health perspective, there's a couple of examples that come to mind immediately. One is that all of the work that's going on right now to allow consumers to interact with technology using speech and voice, like what Amazon and Google are doing, really is a AI-based application. And in health, one of the greatest sources of friction is the interaction with electronic health record for staff. So that area is ripe for the application of these sorts of technologies. Something that's actually available today, and you're starting to see it as a consumer, is taking chat-based information and replacing the way a person interacts with technology by informing it through the previous chat conversation. So for example, a company called HealthTap has 5-6 years of chat-based interactions between patients and doctors. They've taken that and they've trained the user interface now so that when you as a consumer begin to engage based on the learnings that have come from the millions of conversations previously, there is a refined set of questions and answers that helps a consumer get a little bit more precisely to the question they want to answer. That makes that experience a more intelligent one than the traditional way people interact with it. So there's a lot of upside here.
Great. From an investor's standpoint, Lisa, because you got to place bets on these things with real money, what are you thinking about AI in this early stage? Hype, not hype?
Well, it's interesting because I think 87% of all business plans say AI now. It's the word you got to say in every venture pitch. And really there have been 3 areas I think that we've looked at where the applicability seems to be soonest for value. One is in the whole clinical trials and identification of patients for trials, identification of drugs for, the discovery of drugs more rapidly types of stuff. Companies like Clinithink and Deep Six are using these types of approaches. Certainly in the imaging area, an area near and dear to GE's heart, where I work, working with companies like Arteris that's using AI for advanced visualization, really improving the workload of the radiologist so they can focus on the important diagnostic stuff and not just on the marking up and drawing on images. And then lastly, I'd say the predictive analytics side, which will probably take the longest in some ways to reach full adoption, but companies like Health Reveal using AI and deep learning to identify patients who are likely to have major adverse clinical events, so you can intervene quickly, reduce the cost and the risk to the patient in those categories. So that's what we're seeing that's most interesting in those areas right now.
Great.
But we're seeing, I mean, we've seen everything from how to pick a better beer to how to pick the right dog on the AI front.
I'm kind of liking the sound of those from a direct consumer standpoint.
Exactly.
Mike, AI is, you talked about it a little earlier today. What is your view on how other industries are using it and how that could translate to healthcare?
Well, and I think that it's the fact that it is being embedded so that ultimately the end user, whether it's a consumer or a patient in the case of healthcare, or an employee or a doctor or health provider, the expectation is the interface of a system should be smart. It should be intuitive. It shouldn't be every time vanilla and dumb, right? And I think, and we're starting to see that find its way into the real world. And you can say, well, it's going to only happen in super high tech, cutting edge stuff. Well, there's actually some great examples. Like one of my favorites is in Italy, where the Italian government has deployed a bot, a chatbot, text and voice, where your Italian grandma can call up to ask about her pension check and can talk to a bot, and as a result know that it's coming, feel good, you're happy because grandma's happy, and as a result they've had over 70,000 people use this automated system, over 15%, 100% self-serve, and overall government service levels have improved over 30% through making it an intelligent interface. So if Italian grandmas can make it happen, then we know that this is going to find its way into all sectors.
Great. The power of the Italian grandmother cannot be underestimated. Trust me, I know. One of my favorite places. So Galileo and Da Vinci are smiling down on this, the great old scientists. Information. Healthcare is an information industry at its roots. You can't do healthcare without creating information, analyzing it. Last year, the Accenture forecast talked about platforms. This year, that trend pillar has evolved into ecosystems. I'd like to start with Lisa on this because she and I met through health IT circles. What's your take on looking at this emerging ecosystem concept in healthcare, and how can the healthcare industry come to a kumbaya for an ecosystem which I know has challenges? Lisa.
Well, this whole idea of co-opetition has become very popular. It's right up there with AI. And I think that, but it's really interesting because the cooperation amongst groups in healthcare is pretty limited to groups that are not directly competitive, right? And where in other industries you see a lot of actual collaboration among competitors in the straight tech industry. So, and I think that the point of that, or the reason for that, is that data is considered such a tightly held asset, maybe the only asset that allows you to keep control of patients in healthcare. That's very difficult for health systems, for payers and others to let go of that and collaborate. And they haven't, fundamentally. But you are seeing really interesting collaborations among folks that might not have worked together before. For instance, I think about American Heart Association's program, the One Brave Idea. And it's to promote the rapid acceleration of developments in precision medicine. And that was a joint venture between AHA, Google, AstraZeneca, and partners. Now they're all different industries, all different areas, but they are all healthcare companies that traditionally didn't really collaborate in a business sense and are now for that endeavor. So you're seeing that those interesting bedfellow connections come together, and I imagine it'll take regulation to force the sharing of actual data, amongst payers, amongst providers in a different kind of way.
Awesome. Mike, ecosystem building in other industries, there must be this issue of ownership of data, holding data close to the vest. What can we learn from what you've seen in other industries about loosening up?
Well, and I think that it picks up on the themes that Elise just talked about around co-opetition. But one example is all the financial institutions when it comes to blockchain, right? Because they recognize that in some cases, you want to do it all yourself, but you also understand that for certain digital technologies, they're predicated on network effects. Yes. And if and so it comes down to it's only going to work if everyone figures it out together. And so with blockchain, we've seen with the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, with the Open Hyperledger project that we help sponsor, we're also on the Ethereum program as well, you have hundreds of competitors coming together to say we need to define the standards and the technology, because the core isn't what's going to be what differentiates. It's how we exploit it and how we leverage it to our business and to our customers. Seen this a lot also in automotive, right? Strange bedfellows coming together because, for example, GM partnering and investing in Lyft, because they've said if the future of cars is people don't own them, they just ride in them, I want to make sure that it's a GM that they're riding in, so let's make sure we've got that close tie. Or Mercedes and Uber, because Mercedes says we're going to build self-driving cars, but we don't want to be a scheduler, but Uber is already a scheduler, so let's get together, we'll bring the cars, they'll bring the riders, and the net result is that's how we'll compete in whatever the transportation market of the next decade looks like. So again, it's coming together and crossing traditional industries and new digital industries, but to create new business propositions.
But I think it's so interesting that healthcare hasn't recognized that the network effect, that the ATM backbone, technologies, or the standards in cell phones have created massive increase in the size of the industry, and that they haven't taken advantage of that, and recognize that, so to share data so you can expand the opportunity instead of, fearing the collaboration to keep it where it is.
Kaveh, what's your take on this?
Well, I think no question that meaningful business innovation requires both the technologies to plug and play as well as the business models. And we used to talk about platforms, and it appeared that it was really about technology, and the technology is getting good enough that that excuse has fallen away, exposing what Lisa's point is, which is in many cases it's actually the businesses that historically have been the resistance. That being said, the examples of cooperation, just like the examples outside of healthcare, Lyft, for example, with CareMore focusing on transportation for senior services, shows us that in many cases these ecosystem participants tend to be a healthcare participant and a non-healthcare participant, because they have less likely to have competitive business issues. And the other thing that's interesting is many of these are first being expressed around things that would look more like they would be consumer expenses as opposed to traditionally reimbursed by third parties. Again, because that introduces more complexity in the business model. So that's where I would look first to see where these ecosystems work. But I think there is a general recognition by most participants in the healthcare system that the future is much more about not just technologies but companies working together. It's too hard and too complicated for anyone to try to do it by themselves.
And we can even see Amazon, who appears to be doing a lot by themselves, still partnering on the outside, looking to Whole Foods, looking to technology partners to build on Alexa atop of it. So, and on the retail health side, where I spend a lot of time, that's very consumer driven, as you were talking about, Kaveh, when people are paying out of pocket, they want a bundled kind of experience, a retail type experience. So we are seeing these ecosystems coming together through grocery, pharmacy, clinics, on the out-of-pocket spending, which may force pressure going up to the legacy healthcare players, hospital systems and such. So I introduced this last segment looking at the importance of information in healthcare, hither, thither, and yon. Now we want to talk about the labor component of healthcare. That's a huge cost. So I'm always looking to do that triple aim, see if we can improve quality, reduce cost. We want to talk now about the workforce marketplace trend in this forecast that's very powerful in other industries. Mike, where are we seeing workforce marketplace deploying and coming out?
Well, I think we're starting to see a transition thanks to digital technologies, where we're going from historically with kind of business process outsourcing, where an enterprise would tap into hundreds or thousands of supplemental labor pools to help them transact or process, to now where because we can address people digitally, it's becoming efficient to hit spots of talent where you need to supplement one or several. And as a result, because it's a challenge of saying, that's why it becomes a marketplace, saying I have got great talent in my organization, but there's also great talent out there, and if I can only reach out and touch it and bring it in easily, then that unlocks a lot of efficiency and effectiveness. And a great example of this is Procter & Gamble did a side-by-side study where they took teams with equivalent business missions, bring out some new products or new concepts, and they took teams that were 100% P&Gers and some that were using a platform called Upwork to actually pull in supplemental talent. And what they found was that the blended teams, 60% of the time, beat the, it's kind of A/B testing, beat the internal only team 60% of the time on time and budget, right? So and quality. So net result was the triple bottom line you're talking about, because they could pull in. And so I think that's the idea of saying, how do I always have access to the best or the most appropriate, as opposed to what I have here locally.
And also diversity in thinking.
Yes.
You avoid that group think, which is at a P&G or any big company.
Right. A little catalyst for a fresh look.
Exactly.
It can't hurt.
Love that. So Lisa, what are you thinking about this workforce marketplace in healthcare?
It's interesting. This whole gig economy, concept has been actually active in healthcare for some time. When you think about the outsourcing of ER docs, the outsourcing of nurses, and and outsourcing of hospitalists, so certain categories, which I think are generally considered, although they should not be, on the fringe, right? But the core healthcare relationships have not yet moved into this marketplace model. And I think most healthcare systems believe that their people, especially their physicians, are their biggest asset, and that the relationships that they have, real or imagined, with consumers and patients are a fundamental relationship they don't want to give to the marketplace concept. It's a really interesting challenge, because if you just look at the way the caregiver need, for instance, is expanding in the U.S., and the number of caregivers needed is expected to outstrip the number of caregivers available by something like 1 million people over the next 10 years. And that's, I think, right for that gig economy model. You are seeing companies trying to affect that, caregiver services, Honor, et cetera. But it's a real challenge in terms of matching, I think, the quality and the credentialing, the types of sort of underlying issues that may not be as essential on the regulatory side in other industries when you're matching talent to serve a need. So I think it's going to take a while. We aren't seeing a lot of marketplace companies in the healthcare front yet.
Not yet, right. What are you seeing globally, Kaveh, on this?
Well, what's interesting is that when we first proved that it's possible for people to work together without having to be next to each other, then the next logical step was that my people are all over in different locations, and then people ask the question, well, why do they need to work for me? So the hierarchy of control over the labor market is affected. Health is interesting because we have both physical and cognitive tasks. So it's really more the cognitive tasks that are first subject to this kind of a marketplace, because if people have to be physically together, then it often changes the dimensions. What's also interesting, though, is that this conversation around the labor marketplace appears to be limited only to people, but it's really not just people. You're beginning to see the substitution of machines for people. And to Lisa's point, it's not just a theoretical concern. Recently there was an economist in Finland who did published an article that suggested that given the fact that they're the fastest aging population, Western economy, that by 2050 every single person entering the labor force would have to be in healthcare in order to meet the healthcare needs of their society, assuming they did it the way they do it today. This isn't just about saving money. There's a practical reality. There's not enough people to do the work. And so the next order question is robots. And interestingly enough, if you go to a conference in the Western Hemisphere about automation, you see software. But if you go to that same conference title in the Eastern Hemisphere, you see a lot of robots, with the idea that the physical robots replace the tasks of human beings. So the next iteration of this kind of a workforce is a combination of people who aren't in your hierarchy as well as machines, and some combination of people plus machines. So there's a lot of dimensions to this.
But I think before all of us are replaced by robots, we'll probably see, which might be next week, we'll probably see a lot more virtual care. I mean, I think that's the interim step in healthcare, is matching people with physicians or clinicians or services they don't have a personal connection to, but they can get at easily, particularly in rural communities where people are desperate for services, et cetera. And so we're starting to see that move more rapidly, I think, and that sort of drives a lot of this marketplace thinking.
Lisa, you'll never be replaced by a robot.
Sorry
I might,
for you.
but
I, for one, welcome our robot overlord.
I love that. You heard it here first. Something I should mention in healthcare as we segue to thinking about designing for humans is that in the annual Gallup poll every December, they ask who are the most honest and ethical professions in the United States. And the top 3 every year for 10, 12 years are nurses, pharmacists, and doctors, with members of Congress, car salespeople, and insurance salespeople at the bottom. I use this a lot in my talking and speaking because it gets to the point that doctors, nurses, and pharmacists are really this valued, trusted labor force that bring empathy and trust. And trust is a precursor for health engagement, which segues me to ask these folks about this key trend, really a central tenet amongst the 5, which is design for humans and design that can inspire healthy and new behaviors, positive behaviors. So let's unpack it with Mike, because you get this, you
Sure.
live this.
Well, so I think the key here is that because of the power of technology, the compute power, the devices, artificial intelligence, the net result is, for the first time, instead of having the human bend to the technology, we can bend the technology to the human, and we can make it that empathetic, human-centric experience. And so we can focus on what they're doing or what they need, as opposed to saying you need to go to 6 weeks of training so you can learn data entry on how this system works. Instead, you can just live or do. And I think that that is very, very powerful, and a great example, you know, analogous to the healthcare industry, where you think about like the bill you get. Think about your telecom bill, your mobile bill. It might as well be written in Sanskrit. Who knows what it says? Well, 3 Telecom scrapped the bill, said, what does our customer want to know? What do they want to do? They designed a mobile app, and they have their bill, which is a 4.5-star rating in the App Store, and it has people engaging with it multiple times a month, as opposed to a bill that you don't even want to look at, because they went from serving the business to serving the end user, and changed what was a horrible thing into something very positive. And it's actually led to customer retention and actually gaining new customers, because it's a better way to interact.
Can you imagine a health insurance EOB, explanation of benefits, that would empathize with the patient?
That you would give 4.5 stars to.
That, I mean, please.
Let's not talk fiction here, people.
Yeah,
Telcos can do it.
we aspire.
Fair enough.
So Lisa, I mean, can healthcare be designed for human-centric?
Well, can it be? Sure. Will it be? It's a great question. I mean, we haven't seen healthcare industries really step up their game on this and make it a core principle that consumers enjoy or at least tolerate in a positive way their experience in the system. And I think, you know, in a world where we have to bring more technologists, good technologists, to the system in order to improve it, that's a real problem. I mean, so you have to make, if you're out there and you're a technologist and you're a young person looking to enter the workforce right now in the tech world, you're probably not first thinking of healthcare, because you can A, make a lot more money on the tech side, and B, you can be in a place where that consumer empathy issue is more pronounced. I think there's a reason why people in healthcare are very nervous about Amazon and Google and Apple entering the healthcare world in a big way, which is clearly imminent or happening already, because they understand the consumer and how to work with them. So I think, you know, that migration in healthcare from the pharma world, from the med tech world, from the payer world, who don't even today, by and large, employ data scientists or tech people, they have to start thinking about how to bring those people into the mix and bring people who bring with them that consumer sensibility, that user-centered design sensibility, or we're going to keep going backwards.
Kaveh?
I think that part of the reason that health is lagging might be simply that we don't have the respect we have for the science of experience design the way other industries have, largely because we haven't really come from a legacy of being a consumer-oriented business. It's much more of an industry that's been driven by the expertise of the clinician. So even the electronic health record is criticized as being difficult to use, because it is largely built by the needs of the information rather than the needs of the user putting the information into the system. And what I observe now primarily is an evolution of understanding that this is actually a discipline that needs to be brought into the systems. And it's not the same as being an expert in healthcare. In fact, it's got virtually nothing to do with healthcare. And the second reality is that you can't learn about it by doing focus groups or opinion research, which is how we tend to solve problems because we're very analytical. It requires a totally different way of thinking about designing the technology. My sense is that as we gain respect for that, then you'll begin to see that discipline become infused into healthcare information technology, and hopefully it'll be a little bit, it'll be much better than what we see right now.
I hope so, Kava, because I think, the most common answer to the question, how many customers have you shown this to in designing your product? When I meet with entrepreneurs, the most common answer is 0.
That's a reflection, though, of the fact that there's no respect for it as a discipline.
And from the consumer standpoint, and as consumers around the world start paying more out of pocket, getting more both financially and clinically engaged in their own care, there was a survey that came out a couple years ago that I think is a real heads up for the legacy healthcare industry, hospitals, pharma, and providers. And that is that when consumers were asked, who do you trust to help you manage your healthcare, what kinds of industries? About the same percent, around 40% of consumers said, I trust healthcare providers, digitally enabled companies, and big retailers. So Costco, Target, Marks and Spencer, Safeway, my doctor, my hospital, my insurance company, and Apple, Google, Microsoft, Amazon. Equal numbers. Why? Transparency of quality, price, accessibility to understand the value proposition. How good will the arthroscopy be from that doctor or this doctor? What does the health plan cover? So we really have to start thinking about the ethnographic research angle of the healthcare consumer and the clinician, who really need to partner in healthcare and engage. And I think that then takes us to the final 5th trend, which is the uncharted. What is the new business model, the new standards, the new paradigm for healthcare that is uncharted? So I want to start with Kaveh on that for the big hat idea.
Well, as now computing becomes part of everything we do, it introduces all kinds of complexity we can't understand. And first order conversations, people think about, like, will the machines become smarter than humans, and how do we regulate that? That's sort of out there. But more practical are often issues of governance, like, for example, within blockchain, which is by its nature distributed. We don't really have a orderly process for understanding who's in control, and so that's a whole area of uncharted. One of the really interesting areas, particularly for healthcare because it's a regulated industry, is what standard are we going to allow technology or expect technology to meet before we allow it to participate in our healthcare? And the way to understand this is to look at what's going on right now with autonomous vehicles. In the lab, the autonomous vehicle is getting to the point now where some of the cars are almost as safe as the worst driver in the high-risk driver risk pool. Wow. Now the question, of course, is when would you allow an autonomous vehicle to go on the road? When it's as good as the worst driver in a high-risk risk pool, the best driver in the high-risk risk pool, the worst driver in an average risk pool, the best driver in the world, or perfect? Which standard should we use? We don't know the answer to that question. If we pick perfect, we're not going to see autonomous vehicles for a long time. If we pick perfect for diagnostic technology, we're not going to see it for a long time. The negotiation as to what's good enough is completely open area for us, and the answer to that question will drive adoption.
Lisa, what do you think?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, that idea of a minimum viable product, right, in healthcare is a very elusive one. I think, when you're talking about billing systems, you can be wrong. If you're talking about pharmaceuticals, you better be right, or at least most of the time, and at least thoughtful about how you go about that. I think the uncharted territory is that of evidence. I think we're seeing amazing amounts of technology come to the field, and every time, in the 13% of the time they don't say AI in business pitches, they say blockchain or 3D printing or VR, AR. And the challenge I see is that not only do you need to have a practical application, not only do you need data come out of it, but you have to have a use for that data that you can apply in the moment. And you also have to have evidence it makes a difference. Technology for technology's sake in healthcare is not ever going to be adopted, I don't believe. It needs to show that it saves money, that it improves outcome, or it does both. And I think, you know, companies that are thinking about building products in these areas should be cautioned to think about those things from the very beginning. How do you demonstrate with evidence that you can save money and improve outcome?
Great. So Mike, what can we learn from other industries in the uncharted in healthcare?
Well, I think that what the uncharted also means, besides the adoption of technology, is that you're not constrained by the definition of the enterprise as you once were. Like, you know, and so it's like, what is a car company, right? To pick, we use that a little bit, and Kaveh just referenced it, but Tesla makes cars and batteries and solar panels, and now they're digging holes in the ground, and I mean, it's like,
And going up to Mars.
going to Mars. Oh yeah, you know, and well, that's more Elon Musk than just Tesla.
Right.
But Tesla is saying, we're going to get the energy, we're going to store the energy, we're going to put it in, and we're going to move you around. And we're thinking of the entire value chain of what makes motion, and that's why all the other guys are like, whoa, wait, but I make stuff, and they're like, well, we may not even make it, you know. So I think that that's a great example of the boundary because of digital technologies, and we've seen some of that in healthcare with, you know, with like Kaiser Permanente, where they're mixing, you know, the delivery with the insurance, but it's going to go so much further, and so it's not being limited by your classic definition, and using digital technologies, because again, if you don't, someone else will show up. And a couple of the techs have made a run. You know, we've seen Google and Microsoft take an early run at like Health Vault and others, Google Health. First forays, right? And maybe it comes back to the MVP problem. There's a challenge with that. But if you imagine some of these other digital companies, again, like Amazon, what are they? I don't even know, right? But doesn't matter. Whatever they're doing well at. And you've seen Alibaba and others coming out of China, same story. And I just saw this morning, Samsung has released their first drug. So the cell phone guys are making drugs, right? Because it's, whoa, you know, so again, it's going to be, because they're not like, we're a cell phone company. No, they're like, we're a company, and we're going to serve the world's population. So I think that's what the Uncharted is all about, is saying, take all these super high powered technologies and take an examine of what do you want to do, and go and make it happen, because you can.
New business models are the new black.
That's right.
That's right.
Exactly right.
And so I'll riff in conclusion on what you just said, the value chain for motion, the value chain for healthcare, not healthcare, but health. How do we make health? At the end of the day, we have these 5 trends here. Let me pull out the money quote from me in the study, which was, when we design tech for humans that use it, we will redefine the future of healthcare. So we think about that. Think about Amazon voice first. Voice first for inputting data, voice first for ordering up a Willie Nelson song, for making us happier if we have a mood issue. I think this forecast tells us to think people first for making health across this ecosystem. That's where the value really is. Let's break down these business models, establish new standards with the consumer, patient, and the clinician mind at the center, and let's all make health together. Thank you for joining us on this Accenture webcast.